Half of my company over my dead body. I stared at the woman who destroyed my marriage, now standing in my corner office demanding millions from the business I built from absolutely nothing. Her perfectly manicured nails drummed against my mahogany desk while her lawyer shuffled through papers that could potentially strip away everything I'd sacrificed for. But then my phone rang, and in that single moment, everything I thought I knew about my past, my ex-husband, and this calculated woman in front of me was about to shatter completely. My name is Serafina Vale, though most people call me Sarah. And if you're wondering how a girl who once ate instant ramen for 3 straight months built a company worth $500 million, well, that's exactly where this story gets interesting. The city lights of Seattle stretched endlessly beyond my floor-to-ceiling windows, each one representing dreams, ambitions, and the kind of relentless hustle that transforms ordinary people into extraordinary success stories. I used to stare at those same lights from the outside, pressed against coffee shop windows, wondering if I'd ever belong in one of those gleaming towers. Today, I owned the entire 42nd floor. The woman across from me adjusted her designer blazer with the kind of confidence that comes from never having to check a bank balance before making a purchase. Venetia Sterling had walked into my life 3 years ago as my husband's assistant, and walked out of it as his new wife, leaving behind a trail of broken promises and shattered trust that still occasionally kept me awake at night. Her blonde hair was styled in that effortless way that probably cost more than most people's rent. And her smile carried the sharp edge of someone who believed the world owed her everything she wanted. "Sarah, darling," she began, her voice dripping with false sweetness that made my skin crawl. "I think you're being unreasonable. Community property laws are quite clear about marital assets." Her lawyer, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses and the demeanor of someone who enjoyed other people's misery, nodded enthusiastically beside her. "Your company was founded during your marriage to Darius. That makes us entitled to our fair share." I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, the one I'd saved 3 months to afford when the company was nothing more than me and my laptop in a shared workspace that smelled like stale coffee and broken dreams. The irony wasn't lost on me that the woman who had systematically dismantled my personal life was now trying to claim credit for my professional achievements. "Venetia," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the fire building in my chest. "You seem to be confused about something fundamental here." Before I could continue, my assistant knocked and peeked through the glass door. Isabella Rodriguez had been with me since the early days, back when I could barely afford to pay her minimum wage, and she stayed anyway because she believed in what we were building. Her dark eyes held a question, and I nodded for her to enter. "Ms. Vale, there's an urgent call on line 3. The caller said you'd want to take this immediately." Something about Isabella's tone made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. In 3 years of working together, she'd never interrupted a meeting unless it was genuinely critical. I glanced at the caller ID display and felt my blood turn cold. FBI, Seattle Field Office. My mind raced through possibilities, each one more concerning than the last. "Ladies, gentlemen, if you'll excuse me for just one moment." Venetia's perfectly sculpted eyebrows furrowed with annoyance. "Sarah, we're in the middle of important negotiations here. Surely whatever sales call you're dealing with can wait." Her dismissive wave made my jaw clench, but I forced myself to remain composed. She had no idea that this call might change everything, including her comfortable little world built on deception and entitlement. "Actually," I said, reaching for the phone while maintaining eye contact with her, "I have a feeling this conversation is going to be very relevant to our discussion." The phone felt heavier than usual in my hand as I pressed the speaker button, deciding in that split second that transparency might serve me better than privacy. "This is Serafina Vale." Ms. Vale, this is Agent Catherine Walsh with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We need to discuss some developments in our ongoing investigation regarding your ex-husband, Darius Blackwood. And we believe the individuals currently in your office may be relevant to our case. The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear the faint hum of the building's air conditioning system. Venetia's face had drained of color, transforming from confident to confused to something approaching panic in the span of 5 seconds. Her lawyer's pen had frozen mid-note, and I watched as tiny beads of perspiration formed along his receding hairline despite the perfectly climate-controlled office temperature. "Agent Walsh," I said, surprised by how calm my own voice sounded. "Would you mind elaborating on what kind of investigation we're discussing here?" I'd learned long ago that in business, information was power, and right now, I was desperately trying to understand what cards I was holding. Without going into classified details, Ms. Vale, we've been investigating a complex financial fraud scheme involving embezzlement, money laundering, and theft of proprietary technology. Your ex-husband has been under federal surveillance for the past 14 months, and we have reason to believe that his current wife may be an active participant in these illegal activities. Venetia shot to her feet so quickly, her chair rolled backward and crashed into the window with a sharp bang that seemed to echo through the suddenly tense room. "This is ridiculous!" she sputtered, her composure cracking like thin ice under pressure. "Darius is a respected businessman. We're here to claim what's rightfully ours, not to be subjected to some ridiculous government conspiracy theory." Agent Walsh's voice remained professional and steady through the speaker. "Ma'am, if you're Venetia Sterling, also known as Venetia Blackwood, I need to inform you that you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." The pieces of a puzzle I didn't even know existed began clicking into place with frightening clarity. The late-night phone calls Darius used to take in another room. The business trips that seemed to multiply after our first year of marriage. The way he'd suddenly become interested in the technical details of my work, asking pointed questions about algorithms and security protocols that had seemed like supportive curiosity at the time. My brilliant, charming ex-husband hadn't just broken my heart. He'd been systematically planning to steal everything I'd built. "Sarah," Venetia turned to me with desperation replacing her earlier arrogance. "Whatever they think they know, it's wrong. Darius loves me. We're building a life together. This company, your success, it's community property. You can't just take that away from us." Her voice had lost its polished edge, revealing something raw and frightened underneath. I stood slowly, feeling a strange sense of calm settling over me like armor. For 3 years, I'd carried the weight of wondering what I'd done wrong, what I could have changed, how I'd failed to see the signs of Darius's infidelity. The guilt had been a constant companion, whispering that maybe I'd been too focused on work, too driven, too ambitious for my own good. But now, with federal agents painting a picture of calculated criminal behavior, that guilt was transforming into something much more powerful absolute clarity. "Agent Walsh," I said into the phone, "how long have you known about this investigation?" The question felt important, though I wasn't entirely sure why. "Ms. Vale, we've been building this case since shortly after your divorce was finalized. Your ex-husband's financial activities became significantly more suspicious after he gained access to certain proprietary information during your marriage. We believe he's been selling trade secrets to competitors while simultaneously laundering money through shell companies registered under various aliases." Venetia's lawyer had gone completely pale and was frantically packing his briefcase with shaking hands. "Ms. Sterling, I think we should postpone this meeting and seek immediate legal counsel. As your attorney, I strongly advise against saying anything else in this room." His voice cracked on the last word, and I realized he was either completely incompetent or had known more about this situation than he'd initially let on. But Venetia seemed unable to stop talking, as if the words were pouring out of her faster than she could control them. "You don't understand," she said, turning back to me with pleading eyes. "Darius told me you were vindictive, that you'd do anything to hurt him after the divorce. He said you were probably making up stories about the company's value to keep him from getting his fair share. This is just revenge, isn't it? You're working with them to frame us?" The accusation stung, but not in the way she probably intended. Instead of anger, I felt a wave of pity for this woman who had clearly been manipulated as thoroughly as I had been, just in different ways. "Venetia," I said quietly, "when exactly did Darius first mention my company to you?" Her perfectly applied makeup was starting to smudge around her eyes, and for the first time since I'd known her, she looked genuinely human rather than like a carefully constructed image of success. He said you were building something small, just a little tech startup that might be worth something someday. He wanted to make sure we protected his interests in case it ever became profitable." "And when was this conversation?" I pressed, though I was beginning to suspect I already knew the answer. "About 6 months before you caught us together," she whispered, the admission hanging in the air like smoke from a fire that was still burning. The timeline crystallized in my mind with brutal precision. 6 months before I'd discovered their affair, Darius had already been planning his exit strategy. He hadn't fallen in love with his assistant and made a spontaneous mistake. He'd orchestrated the entire situation to position himself for maximum financial gain. The betrayal I'd blamed myself for had been nothing more than calculated theft wrapped in the disguise of romance. Agent Walsh's voice cut through my revelation. "Ms. Vale, we're going to need to conduct a more detailed interview with you at your earliest convenience. We have evidence suggesting that several of your company's proprietary algorithms were illegally accessed and sold to competitors through a network of shell companies traced back to Mr. Blackwood and his associates." "What kind of evidence?" I asked, though part of me was afraid to hear the answer. "Financial records showing payments to overseas accounts, email communications detailing trade secret transfers, and surveillance footage of meetings between Mr. Blackwood and representatives from competing firms. We also have testimony from a former business associate who agreed to cooperate in exchange for reduced charges." Venetia had sunk back into her chair and was staring at her hands as if she'd never seen them before. The confident woman who had strutted into my office an hour ago demanding half of everything I'd built had been replaced by someone who looked lost and frightened. "He told me he was consulting," she murmured. "Just helping other companies with their technology problems. He said it was all legitimate business." Her lawyer cleared his throat nervously. "Agent Walsh, my client is clearly confused and upset. We're going to need some time to process this information and respond appropriately through proper legal channels." He was trying to regain control of a situation that had spiraled completely beyond his influence. But his voice lacked conviction. "Of course," Agent Walsh replied. "However, I should mention that we have agents positioned outside the building, and we'd prefer if Ms. Sterling remained available for immediate questioning. We've been waiting for an opportunity to approach her in a controlled environment, and this meeting has provided exactly what we needed." The implications of that statement hit me like a physical blow. The FBI had known Venetia would be here today. They'd been watching, waiting, probably hoping she'd incriminate herself further. Which meant my morning meeting had been orchestrated as much by federal agents as it had been by a desperate woman trying to claim money she believed she deserved. I felt like a chess piece being moved around a board by players whose strategies I was only beginning to understand. "How long have you been watching me?" I asked Agent Walsh. needing to know how much of my life had been under federal scrutiny. Ms. Vale, you've never been a target of our investigation. However, as the primary victim of the theft we're investigating, your activities have been of interest to our case. We've been hoping for an opportunity to speak with you about what you might have observed during your marriage, particularly regarding any unusual business activities or contacts your ex-husband may have had. The word victim settled over me like a blanket I wasn't sure I wanted to wear. For 3 years, I'd been rebuilding my life, my confidence, and my business empire, refusing to see myself as anything other than a survivor who'd overcome betrayal through sheer determination. But now, I was being told that the betrayal had been even more extensive than I'd imagined, and that I'd been an unwitting participant in a federal investigation for over a year. Venetia looked up at me with tears streaming down her face, her mascara creating dark trails that made her look younger and more vulnerable than I'd ever seen her. Sarah, I swear I didn't know. When I met Darius, he seemed so successful, so confident. He told me he was building an empire, that we were going to travel the world and live the kind of life most people only dream about. I never questioned where the money was coming from. Despite everything she'd put me through, despite the way she'd systematically destroyed my marriage and then had the audacity to demand half of my life's work, I found myself believing her. There was something in her voice, a brokenness that felt too genuine to be manufactured. She'd been used just as thoroughly as I had, just in different ways and for different purposes. The money, I said, pieces continuing to fall into place. Venetia, how much money has Darius been spending the house, the cars, the lifestyle you two have been living? Where did you think it was all coming from? Her hands trembled as she wiped at her eyes. He said he'd made some good investments, that his consulting work was really taking off. We bought the house in Bellevue, the one with the view of Lake Washington. It cost $2.8 million, but he said it was nothing compared to what we'd have once his big deals started closing. She paused, her voice getting smaller. He's been talking about buying a yacht, a 50-footer that costs more than most people make in a lifetime. The numbers didn't add up, and apparently the FBI had noticed the same discrepancies that were now obvious to me. Darius had been living far beyond any legitimate income he could have been generating, which meant the money had to be coming from somewhere else. Somewhere illegal, apparently, and quite possibly from the theft of my own intellectual property. Agent Walsh's voice brought me back to the present moment. Ms. Vale, without revealing operational details, I can tell you that your ex-husband's spending patterns have been a significant part of our investigation. We estimate that he's illegally obtained and spent somewhere in the range of $12 to $15 million over the past 2 years. $12 to $15 million. The number hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. That wasn't just theft. That was systematic, large-scale criminal enterprise. And if even a fraction of that money had come from selling my company's proprietary information, then the damage to my business could be catastrophic. Competitors with access to our algorithms could undercut our pricing, steal our clients, or even develop competing products that would destroy our market position. Agent Walsh, I said, my voice sounding steadier than I felt. What kind of information are we talking about? What exactly did he steal from my company? The pause before her answer told me I wasn't going to like what came next. Ms. Vale, we believe your ex-husband had access to your company's core fraud detection algorithms, client lists, pricing strategies, and development roadmaps. Based on our investigation, this information was systematically copied and sold to at least 3 competing firms, potentially compromising your competitive advantage in ways that could cost your company hundreds of millions in lost revenue. The room started spinning, and I had to grip the edge of my desk to steady myself. Everything I'd built, every late night, every sacrifice, every small victory that had led to bigger victories, all of it had been compromised by the person I'd trusted most in the world. The betrayal wasn't just personal anymore. It was professional, financial, and potentially company-ending. Venetia was staring at me with a mixture of horror and dawning understanding. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Sarah, I had no idea. When we were planning this meeting, when Darius said we deserved half of your company, I thought we were just claiming what was legally ours. I never imagined he'd stolen from you." Her lawyer had given up any pretense of professionalism and was openly sweating now. His wire-rimmed glasses fogged and his hands shaking as he tried to organize papers that seemed to keep slipping through his fingers. "Ms. Sterling, please stop talking. Anything you say right now could be used against you in court. We need to invoke your right to remain silent immediately." But Venetia seemed beyond caring about legal strategy. She turned to face me fully. Her designer outfit now rumpled and her perfect composure completely shattered. "He played us both, didn't he? You and me? We were just, tools for him to use?" The question hung between us like a bridge I wasn't sure I was ready to cross. For 3 years. I'd hated this woman for destroying my marriage, for stealing my husband, for representing everything I'd lost and couldn't get back. But now, looking at her tear-streaked face and genuine confusion, I was beginning to see her as something I'd never considered before, another victim of Darius's manipulation. "Yeah," I said quietly. "I think maybe we were." Agent Walsh cleared her throat through the speaker. "Ms. Vale, Ms. Sterling, I'm going to need both of you to come in for formal interviews as soon as possible. Ms. Sterling, as I mentioned, you have the right to remain silent and the right to an attorney. Given the nature of the charges we're preparing, I'd strongly recommend you exercise both of those rights." The weight of what was happening began to settle over me like a heavy blanket. This wasn't just about my failed marriage anymore, or even about Venetia's misguided attempt to claim half of my company. This was about federal crimes, prison sentences, and the possibility that my life's work had been systematically stolen and sold by the person who was supposed to love and support me more than anyone else in the world. Isabella appeared in the doorway again, her expression tense with concern. "Ms. Vale, there are several men in suits in the lobby asking to speak with your visitors. They're showing federal identification." The moment had arrived when theory would become reality, when speculation would transform into handcuffs and official charges. I looked at Venetia, who had gone completely pale and was gripping the arms of her chair so tightly her knuckles had turned white. Despite everything between us, despite the pain and anger and resentment, I felt an unexpected wave of sympathy for her. She was about to discover that the life she thought she'd been living was built entirely on lies and criminal activity. "Venetia," I said, surprising myself with the gentleness in my voice. "You should call a real lawyer, not him." I nodded toward her current attorney, who looked like he was about to pass out. "But someone who specializes in federal criminal defense. You're going to need serious help." She looked at me with something approaching gratitude mixed with terror. "Sarah, I know I don't have any right to ask this, but do you think there's any chance this is all some kind of mistake, that maybe the FBI is wrong about Darius?" I thought about all the late nights he'd spent on mysterious phone calls, all the business trips that had seemed to multiply after our first year of marriage, all the times he'd asked seemingly innocent questions about my work that I'd dismissed as supportive interest. I thought about the timeline Agent Walsh had described, and the way everything lined up with terrifying precision. Most of all, I thought about the $12 to $15 million he'd somehow acquired and spent. Money that had to have come from somewhere. No, I said, meeting her eyes directly. I don't think it's a mistake. The sound of footsteps in the hallway grew louder, and I realized that whatever happened next would change everything for all of us. The comfortable life Venetia had been living was about to collapse. The man she'd married and trusted was about to be revealed as a criminal who'd used her as a cover for his illegal activities. And I was about to learn exactly how much damage had been done to the company I'd built from nothing. How many years of work might have been compromised by someone I'd once promised to love and trust forever. But strangely, as I watched federal agents appear in my office doorway and begin the process of taking Venetia into custody, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 3 years: absolute clarity about what had really happened to my marriage and why. The truth, as devastating as it was also setting me free. 3 hours later, I sat in a sterile FBI conference room that smelled like industrial coffee and fluorescent lighting, watching Agent Catherine Walsh spread photographs across a metal table like cards in the world's most expensive poker game. Each image told a piece of a story I was only beginning to understand: Darius entering buildings I didn't recognize, meeting with people whose faces meant nothing to me, carrying briefcases and manila envelopes that apparently contained pieces of my life's work. "Ms. Vale," Agent Walsh said, her voice carrying the weight of someone who'd seen too many cases like this one. "I need you to understand the scope of what we're dealing with here. Your ex-husband wasn't just stealing from you. He was running a sophisticated operation that involved multiple companies, offshore accounts, and what we believe to be connections to organized financial crime." I picked up one of the photographs, studying Darius's face as he shook hands with a man in an expensive suit outside what looked like a downtown law office. Even in the grainy surveillance image, he looked confident, successful, completely at ease with whatever transaction was taking place. This wasn't the face of someone who'd made a desperate mistake or gotten in over his head. This was the face of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. "How long have you been watching him?" I asked, setting the photo down carefully. 14 months, as I mentioned earlier. But our investigation actually began because of irregularities we noticed in the financial sector. Your ex-husband's name came up when several competing firms suddenly developed remarkably similar fraud detection capabilities to yours, all within a 6-month period. The implication hit me like ice water in my veins. While I'd been proud of our company's rapid growth and market success, while I'd been attributing our competitors' improvements to the natural evolution of the industry, they'd actually been using stolen versions of the algorithms I'd spent years developing. Every contract we'd lost, every client who'd chosen a competitor's similar but less expensive solution, every late night I'd spent wondering how other companies had caught up so quickly. It all made sense now. Agent Walsh pulled out a thick folder and opened it to reveal bank statements, wire transfer records, and what looked like email correspondence. "We estimate that information stolen from your company generated approximately $8.7 million in illicit revenue for your ex-husband and his network. The money was laundered through shell companies, offshore accounts, and cryptocurrency transactions designed to obscure the paper trail." $8.7 million. I tried to wrap my mind around the number, but it felt too large, too abstract to fully comprehend. That wasn't just money. That was years of research and development, intellectual property that represented countless hours of work by me and my entire team. It was the foundation of competitive advantages that I'd thought we'd earned through innovation and hard work. "There's more," Agent Walsh continued, her expression growing even more serious. "We have evidence that your ex-husband was planning to steal additional proprietary information, including your upcoming artificial intelligence protocols and your expansion strategy for the European market. We believe his marriage to Venetia Sterling was partially motivated by the need for a legitimate-looking business partner who could help him establish credibility with international contacts. The revelation about Venetia struck me differently than I'd expected. Instead of vindication or satisfaction, I felt a hollow sadness for both of us. She'd been used just as thoroughly as I had, manipulated into a relationship that was built on lies and criminal intent. The woman who'd demanded half of my company that morning was probably sitting in a holding cell right now, learning that the man she'd married had never loved her any more than he'd loved me. We'd both just been useful tools in his elaborate theft scheme. My phone buzzed with a text message, and I glanced at the screen to see Isabella's name. Ms. Vale, multiple reporters are calling about FBI activity at the office. How should I respond? The reality of what this investigation would mean for my company's reputation began to sink in, even if we recovered from the financial damage. The publicity surrounding a federal criminal case could destroy client confidence and partnerships we'd spent years building. Agent Walsh noticed my distraction. Ms. Vale, I need to prepare you for what comes next. This investigation is going to become public knowledge, probably within the next 48 hours. Your company will be identified as a victim of corporate espionage and theft, which means you'll likely face intense media scrutiny and questions from clients, investors, and competitors. What about my employees? I asked, thinking about the 37 people who depended on our company for their livelihoods. Some of them have been with me since the beginning. They don't deserve to have their careers destroyed because of what Darius did. Actually, Agent Walsh said, pulling out another document, your employees may be key witnesses in this case. We're going to need to interview anyone who had contact with your ex-husband during your marriage, anyone who might have observed him accessing company systems or asking unusual questions about proprietary information. The thought of subjecting my team to federal interrogation made my stomach clench. These were people who'd believed in our mission, who'd worked 60-hour weeks during product launches and celebrated every milestone like it was their own personal victory. Now they'd be questioned about their boss's criminal ex-husband, forced to relive moments they probably hadn't thought twice about at the time. There is some good news, Agent Walsh continued, apparently noticing my distress. Because you're the primary victim in this case, and because your cooperation has been invaluable to our investigation, the FBI is prepared to work with you on minimizing the disruption to your business operations. We'll coordinate interviews to avoid interfering with critical projects, and we'll provide documentation that clearly establishes your company's status as a victim rather than a participant in any illegal activities. The word victim still felt uncomfortable, like clothing that didn't quite fit properly. For 3 years, I'd rebuilt my life by refusing to see myself as someone things happened to, instead becoming someone who made things happen. But maybe there was strength in acknowledging that sometimes powerful, determined people could still be deceived and betrayed by those they trusted most. My phone rang, and I saw my business partner, Raven Nakamura's name on the screen. Raven had joined the company 18 months ago, bringing Wall Street experience and the kind of strategic thinking that had helped us navigate our most complex client relationships. She'd also become one of my closest friends, someone whose judgment I trusted implicitly. Agent Walsh, may I take this call? It's my business partner, and she needs to know what's happening. Of course. In fact, we'll probably need to speak with her as well, given her role in the company. I answered the phone, putting it on speaker with Agent Walsh's permission. Raven, I need to tell you something, and it's going to sound completely insane. Sarah, what the hell is happening? Isabella called and said the FBI was in the office, and now there are news vans outside the building. Please tell me this isn't about tax evasion or securities fraud or something that's going to destroy everything we've built. Despite the gravity of the situation, I almost smiled. Raven's first concern was always protecting our business and our employees. It was one of the things I valued most about our partnership. It's not about anything we did wrong, I assured her. But it is about Darius, and it's much worse than I ever imagined. I spent the next 10 minutes explaining the investigation, the theft of our proprietary information, and the federal charges that were apparently being prepared against my ex-husband. Raven listened without interrupting, though I could hear her sharp intake of breath when I mentioned the $8.7 million in stolen revenue. "Son of a bitch," she said when I finished, her voice tight with controlled anger. "Sarah, do we have any idea how much this has cost us in terms of lost business if our competitors have been undercutting us using stolen algorithms? We could be looking at hundreds of millions in damages." Agent Walsh leaned toward the phone. "Ms. Nakamura, this is Agent Catherine Walsh with the FBI. That's exactly the kind of financial analysis we're going to need for the prosecution's case. Would you be available to meet with our financial crimes unit tomorrow morning?" "Absolutely," Raven replied without hesitation. "Agent Walsh, what are the chances of recovering any of the stolen money? And more importantly, what can we do to protect our remaining intellectual property from further theft?" "Those are excellent questions, and they're exactly what we need to discuss. The good news is that we've frozen several accounts connected to this investigation, and we expect to recover a significant portion of the stolen funds. As for protection, we'll be working with your IT security team to ensure that any remaining access points have been completely secured." The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, covering logistics, timelines, and legal procedures that would reshape our company's immediate future. But underneath the practical details, I was grappling with a more fundamental question. How do you rebuild trust when the person who betrayed you had access to everything you cared about most as I left the FBI office 3 hours later? Seattle's evening skyline looked different somehow, less like a symbol of endless possibility and more like a reminder of how much could be lost if you trusted the wrong person with your dreams. My phone had accumulated 47 missed calls and over 100 text messages from reporters, clients, investors, and friends who'd seen the news reports that were apparently already circulating. The drive back to my apartment gave me time to think about what came next. Tomorrow, our company would wake up to a world where everyone knew we'd been the victims of systematic corporate espionage. Our clients would have questions about data security. Our investors would want reassurance about our competitive position. Our employees would need leadership and honesty about what this meant for their futures. But tonight, I had a different kind of call to make. Venetia answered on the third ring, her voice small and shaky. "Sarah, I'm surprised you're calling me." "Are you okay?" I asked, realizing I genuinely wanted to know the answer. "I'm at my sister's house in Portland. My new lawyer, says I probably won't be charged with anything serious since I can prove I didn't know about Darius's illegal activities. But everything I thought I knew about my life, about my marriage, about my future, it's all gone." We talked for an hour. Two women who'd been systematically deceived by the same man, comparing notes about lies we'd believed and red flags we'd ignored. She told me about the expensive gifts that had never quite made sense, the business associates who'd seemed uncomfortable around her, the way Darius had always insisted on handling all financial matters himself. "Sarah," she said as our conversation was winding down, "I know this doesn't fix anything, but I'm sorry, not just for what Darius did to your company, but for my part in destroying your marriage. I thought I was fighting for love, but I was just being used to hurt you." "We were both being used," I replied. "The question now is what we do with that knowledge." After hanging up, I stood on my apartment balcony looking out at the lights of the city I'd chosen as my home, thinking about the strange turns life could take. This morning, I'd been a successful CEO dealing with an annoying legal claim from my ex-husband's new wife. Tonight, I was the primary victim in a federal criminal investigation that would probably reshape my entire industry's approach to data security. But I was also something else. I was free. Free from the guilt I'd carried about my failed marriage. Free from wondering what I could have done differently. Free from the nagging doubt that maybe I hadn't been enough to keep the man I'd loved from straying. Darius hadn't left me for someone better. He'd left me because I'd been too honest, too trusting, too focused on building something legitimate to notice that he was building something criminal. The next morning brought a media frenzy that was both exhilarating and terrifying. Our company's stock price jumped 12% as investors realized that the competitive disadvantages we'd been facing were artificial and temporary. 3 major clients called to express support and discuss expanding their contracts. Industry publications were already calling it the biggest corporate espionage case in tech sector history. But the most interesting call came from an unexpected source, the head of acquisitions at Goldman Sachs, who wanted to discuss a potential buyout that could value our company at over $2 billion. "Ms. Vale," he said during our preliminary conversation, "what your ex-husband stole was valuable, but what he couldn't steal, your innovation process, your team's expertise, your reputation for integrity. That's what makes your company truly worth acquiring." As I hung up that call, I realized that Darius's betrayal, as devastating as it had been, had also revealed something important. The core of what I'd built was strong enough to survive even systematic theft and deception. The algorithms could be replicated, but the culture, the relationships, and the innovative thinking that created those algorithms couldn't be stolen. 6 months later, I stood in a federal courthouse watching Darius receive a 15-year sentence for financial fraud, corporate espionage, and money laundering. Venetia sat 2 rows behind me, having received probation and community service after cooperating fully with the investigation. We'd developed an unlikely friendship based on shared experience and mutual support through the legal proceedings. The judge's final words echoed in the courtroom. "Mr. Blackwood, your actions represent not just theft of money, but theft of trust, innovation, and the fundamental principles that allow legitimate businesses to thrive. The sentence reflects the severity of these crimes and the extensive damage you've caused to multiple victims." As Darius was led away in handcuffs, I felt a sense of closure I hadn't expected. The man I'd once loved enough to marry was going to prison for stealing from me, but somehow that felt like justice rather than revenge. That evening, Raven and I celebrated the conclusion of the legal proceedings at our favorite restaurant overlooking Elliott Bay. The Goldman Sachs acquisition had been completed the previous month, making us both extraordinarily wealthy and giving our employees stock options that would change their lives. We'd also established a foundation focused on supporting women entrepreneurs who'd survived business betrayal or corporate fraud. "So," Raven said, raising her glass of champagne, "what's next for the newly minted billionaire?" I thought about the question seriously. The money was wonderful, but it wasn't the real victory. The real victory was knowing that I'd built something strong enough to survive betrayal, something valuable enough that others wanted to invest in it, something meaningful enough that it could help other people avoid the mistakes I'd made. "I think," I said, clinking my glass against hers, "I'm ready to build something even bigger." But as we walked back to our cars that night, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Congratulations on your success. We should talk soon. There are things about Darius's network that the FBI doesn't know yet." A friend. I stared at the message, feeling the familiar chill of uncertainty creeping back into my carefully reconstructed world. Just when I thought the story was over, it seemed like there might be another chapter waiting to be written. "Want to know what that mysterious message means?" and whether Sarah's story of betrayal and justice is really over. Hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling me what you think is coming next, because something tells me this incredible journey is far from finished.